my name is Alan Niven, and we are on The Metal Show.
That is right. We are so honored to have you on the This Is Metal show, Alan. And of course, you have a book coming out called Sound and Fury at the end of the
That
month.
work for you?
You want to talk a little bit about the book and talk about your decision to write a book?
The decision to write the book is basically to get a monkey off my back, because I have been hounded by people for years. When are you going to write your memories? And I'm not a big fan of rock and roll books. They're all the same, only the names change. We start out with the deprived childhood, then we have the indivisible young bloods fighting for a place in the world. They get a place in the world, they get success, girlfriends, and money, and then it all breaks apart, and then finally you get the book full of recriminations and blame. It's all pretty boring. But people have been asking me for a very, very long time, and two people in particular nagged me for a long, long time. And I did try writing a manuscript at one point, and it was horrible. It was boring. It was depressing to write. And I'd fallen into the trap of writing a historical, chronological narrative. And of course, one day I woke up to the fact of nobody wants to hear all this. They don't want 10 chapters on your childhood at the beginning of your book. If somebody's sitting with you at the kitchen table, what they want is a story, and right now. So, you know, I'm just the old jukebox in the corner. Come up, put a quarter in, and I'll tell you a story. Pour me another glass of port, I might tell you another one. And that's the approach I took to the book. The other thing about the book was it had to have a sense of entertainment to it. And I thought it best to try and write it not for the fan, but for the curious. Because fans will find out things anyway, especially in the day and age of the internet. If you're a devout fan of a band, you know everything already. What's more interesting is if the curious person goes, you know what, I'm at the airport, I'll pick up a book, maybe it'll get me to Peoria.
Yeah, you know, Alan, that's the thing. You know, your publisher, Jamie, was gracious enough to send me an advance copy of the book. And one thing that really stood out to me about the book was these were stories I'd never heard of. And for people watching this, of course, our guest, Alan, here is he's a manager of both Guns N' Roses and Great White. And he's got a lot of great stories. One of those stories, Alan, I wanted to ask you about was when Black Flag was opening for Guns N' Roses and Axl was refusing to go on stage. And you asked Black Flag to do 3 different encores, and it got to a point where they were like, hey, we played all our material. We don't want to do any more covers. We're not going on again. I mean, talk a little bit about that. That had to have been a crazy day in your life.
Black Flag, God bless them. They bought me as much time as they could. And bless their hearts, they went out on stage and played Beatles covers for me to buy time. And they were done, believe you me, they were done after that. But from September of 1976 onwards through to 1991, most days were interesting with GNR. And you add to that mix Jack Russell. Yeah, if I was driving home and I thought we'd had a good day, then I knew there was one phone call I hadn't returned yet, because there was always something.
Okay, Lethal X, take it away.
How you doing there, Alan? So yeah, I was thinking about some of the stuff with Guns N' Roses and those types of things, and you know how that whole breakup kind of happened with you guys and stuff. Do you think that there was a time when possibly, you know, you two actually got together and actually worked as one, or was it always like a combative type of situation with Axl.
No, it wasn't permanently combative. Um, that's a consistent misrepresentation by the person who took over management after me. Um, there were moments of harmony. That's a mischaracterization that he puts out there all the time, because he has to spend his life justifying his actions. There were times when Axe and I were in harmony. There were times when we definitely weren't.
Okay. So, yeah, you guys pretty much got along
Next
on
question.
both days good, and then there was others. There was a miscommunication going on there. So, would you say that if you had a chance to do anything different, you would do anything different, or would you say everything was done as best as it could at the time?
Two perspectives on that, Mr. X. The first obvious perspective is there anything that you would like to go back and do better in your life? I would hazard a guess that there might be one or two things that you'd go back and go, you know what was I fucking thinking then? All right, we all make mistakes in life, and some of them are of a high profile and are all the more annoying and embarrassing for that. And hopefully a lot of them you can just quietly sweep under the bed and say, oh, well. You know, I think all of us go through life going, you know, if I could get back in the time machine, we might be able to do something better then. The other perspective is this. When I started working with GNR, for example, no one wanted them. When I started working with Great White, no one was remotely interested. With the latter, we ended up selling over 10 million albums on the Capitol label, which is not bad. It's a pretty good bat. With the other one, they're at 100 million records sold around the world. So in that respect, I would say that since no one else wanted to work with them or would work with them, with GNR in the early days, and considering where they were when we parted ways, I think I made some good decisions and did my work quite well.
Yeah, and Alan, as you said, you also work with Great White, and sadly, Jack just passed last year. I was curious, what are your memories from when you first started working with Great White? I mean, and how surprised were you when the band kind of splintered into two different bands?
I think the fact that they split into two different bands was extraordinarily unfortunate. I don't think it did either of them any good. There was a symbiosis between Kendall's playing and Jack's performing that worked, obviously. Went out and played a lot of gigs. So that was sad. And for me, I would have loved it if they had just done it once, gotten back together and recorded it and filmed it and said, okay, we're done, we don't want to work together anymore. But at least for those who enjoyed that band as that band should have been, they should have done it once, at least. The fact that there are 2 or 3 bands out there now, all playing the same material, I tend to smile and say, well, the songs must be quite good.
Yeah, and I would think in regards to Great White, you kind of have the honor of saying, "Hey, I was there when they were, breaking big. I was there during the heyday, and I got to see all the great stuff."
Well, it's more than that. I mean, that was a profound relationship I had with Jack and Mark and Michael. It's the main co-writer in the band, produced the successful records, and it took 5 years of work for them to break. And there was a determination. I mean, we initially got signed to EMI USA in 1983, and that was a disastrous relationship. And then no one wanted to know about the band after that, so I had to go back to recording an independent record to get them going again. We fought long and hard for that because, you know, where, for example, after a year of being on the road with the likes of Whitesnake and Judas Priest, that was an incredible learning curve. So, to my mind, the band were better in 1985 than they were in 1983. Yet in 1983, there were 8 labels that wanted to sign them, and in 1985, no one wanted to touch them with a barge pole, which is, I think, a fairly good example of the lack of intelligence and thinking that you can find or could find on Sunset Strip and the record labels there. Because to me, it was obvious. We've had a year on the road with 2 major acts. We've learned a lot. We've learned how to make a record and how not to make a record. But it was a struggle to get the Capitol deal, and thank God we did.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't think there's anybody out there that probably has not, well, I can't say anybody, but I would say most people would agree they've heard at least one great White song, somewhere. I mean, the one that comes to my mind is, Save All Your Love, that whole thing. That just kind of just stuck. I got hooked on that. Um, do you think that, well, I can't say that. Do you think that if things had, kind of worked out a little bit differently, though, if they would still be put some records out today and doing things if they hadn't gone and split in other directions?
Um, it depends on the perspective you have when you get out of bed in the morning. If you wake up and you're in a good mood and you look outside and you go, oh, what a perfect day it is. There's a little bit of rain. It's not 100 degrees and you're in a good mood. You might think, yeah, we could have gone on and made more records and maybe had 1 or 2 more hits and so on and so forth. On the other hand, if you get out of bed and you find there's no coffee left and you're in a bad mood at the get-go, you stand there in the kitchen, you go, given Jack Russell's propensity for self-destruction, it was a freaking miracle we got as far as we did. God knows what he would have gotten up to later in life. If spontaneity is essential to rock and roll, then Jack definitely had plenty of spontaneity, if you follow me. His capacity for self-destruction and for screwing things up was immeasurable.
Yeah, yeah. I got to ask you, Alan, because many people, when I talk to them about Great White, the early days of Great White, if you listen to the first couple of releases, I mean, were much closer to metal. And of course, later on, they became more of a blues-based band. I was curious, was there a meeting where the band kind of decided, or was it just a matter of a band finding their sound?
Well, I have a little bit of a problem with throwing
Labels.
descriptions and labels around like metal. I could sit down and play somebody something from the 70s and say, well, what do you think of that? And they go, it's great, it's metal. No, it's not. It's a blues rock song from a British band called Savoy Brown, for example. In terms of the early release on EMI was definitely part of the mindset of the band, which desired to be thought of as a cross between Judas Priest and Van Halen. So they affected that. They were the strongest influences at the time. And the record didn't do as well as people had hoped. So that first album, when it came out during the record cycle, I believe, got just over 100,000 units, which is not a hell of a lot, but not bad for a first record. So we're sitting in the studio and we're recording demos for what will hopefully be a next record. And I will say from my point of view, some of the material was, predictable, ho-hum, nothing that really inspired me that much. And between takes on something, Kendall would be sitting in the studio playing blues licks. And after enough nights of this, the light bulb goes on in your head. That's his comfort zone. That's what he feels best doing. And I've got a guy who is both a vocalist and a singer. For me, there are some great rock and roll vocalists, but they have a tone. They have an attitude, but they don't necessarily have a content to what they're singing about. I mean, Stephen Pearcy for me sounds great, but what the fuck is he on about? I still don't know. A singer is somebody who can inhabit an intelligence, a spirit, can inhabit an emotion. And with Jack, I had somebody who had a great tone, which made him a great vocalist. And I also had somebody who had sufficient emotional intelligence that he could express an emotion. So I was spoiled. So it was like, no, we don't have to be Van Priest. Let's find out what the core character and personality of this band is. And that's the other thing that, we don't see that much of today. It takes time for a band to settle its chemistry and find out who they are and develop their personality. And we don't see that much of that anymore, but there was a lot more of that back in the day. And from 1982 to 1985, 86, it was a growth period of establishing what was the best chemistry within the band. And the next record we put out went to 2 million. So I think we might have got something right. Seemed to connect.
Sure.
Yeah. So now you bring up an interesting thing about today's bands that are out there and the past bands. Today's bands, there seems to be a very similar sound. They all have that same kind of rhythm and the same drumming style and so forth. But back then, you were in the process of getting stuff going and everything else. And I did see something somewhere where you were actually staying with Don Dokken at one point or something, if that was true, in the early days. So that whole process had to be a journey for you. Is there a particular story from that era that you would like to share with us that you thought was impactful to you as a person?
As regards what? As regards the personality of the band I was dealing with,
Or
I
how
mean,
you are today, I guess. How you view things. Do you think that whole experience changed the way you perceive stuff going on now, or do you think that maybe it was the
I,
best opportunity
I,
at the time that you had, and that journey has taken you to where you are now in life, I guess?
well, we've got more than one level there. That's a very multi-layered question that you've laid out. The first band that I signed was called Motley Crue. Are they my favorite band in the world? No. Am I thrilled with the way that they went through life? Which, from my opinionated point of view, is as brutish entertainers. I feel ambivalent about that, for who they are and the way that they treat people and treat women in particular. On the other hand, when a tape was put into my hand and somebody said, would you please evaluate it and see if we should get involved, and I went home and listened to it, I went, this record is something of a sonic train wreck. It's not that well recorded and produced, and it's not that well arranged, but it's got an attitude. And on top of that, it has a great little rock and roll song on it called Piece of Your Action. And for me at that moment, that was like manna from heaven where I was working. That to me was like, yes, this is a possibility of being involved in something that reaches a wider audience. Because survival as a record distributor or whatever you're doing in the music business, how many people do you reach? How many people vote with their wallets and actually buy your record or go to your performance? There's your level of survival. So I wouldn't necessarily have picked Motley Crue as my optimum signing, but they were there and no one else wanted them. So I went, guess what? I'm going to take them on. I'm going to sign them, and I think we can get somewhere. Yeah, I lived with Don for a while, and it was Don who introduced me to a band that was called Dante Fox, who became Great White. So again, life is circumstantial. What door opens for you? What door doesn't open for you? Oh, he would Dante Fox, and Don pushed me hard to take them seriously, and initially I was not impressed. There was one night at the Troubadour, and it was the third time I'd gone to see them, and each time I'd gone because Don had said, "You're not getting it." And they closed the set by playing "I Don't Need No Doctor." And at that moment, I swear to God, the roof of the Troubadour lifted 3 inches off its walls. Kendall just took the place and destroyed it with his playing, and Jack was dead on. And at that moment, it was obvious to me, oh, okay, I get it. So again, that was a point I came back to, obviously later, because struggling to get the core of the band identified, I had to also sit there and go, not only is he playing blues in the studio between takes, but what was the moment that absolutely got you convinced there was something here? It was them playing "I Don't Need No Doctor." There's a sign. This American band is actually a British blues rock band from the early 70s. That's what's trying to come out.
Wow.
And I think I
Wow.
was right. I mean, you know, Rock Me, House of Broken Love. I mean, there's a broad and deep catalogue of songs that they've recorded.
Yeah, it's like man, what a great storyteller. It's like we were right there. But I want to ask you too, Alan, before we wrap it up for today. Another thing that impressed me when I read the book was your decision. You said early on that you were going to be much more than just a business manager. You took the time to learn how to become a songwriter, and I think that really just says a load there.
Well, I mean, music absolutely fascinated and enchanted me from a very young age. Absolutely adored listening to records and the radio. You know, when I was in a boarding school in England, I'd have this tiny little transistor radio with one earpiece coming out of it, listening to Radio Luxembourg, which was broadcast obviously out of Luxembourg in Europe, and we could get the signal in England, and it was, if I remember, their call out was Fabulous 208, and I'd be under my covers and under my pillow with this thing stuffed in my ear to hear what they were playing. I had a fascination and a passion for music from the get-go. Started out as a van driver, a gopher at Virgin. Bought my first Telecaster when I was 18 or something. Had some really rotten guitars before that. But it was always a passion for me. And it also provided me with a method of avoiding working for a living. I didn't have to be a lawyer. I didn't have to be an accountant. I didn't have to go to Sandhurst, which is what my parents thought I should be doing, which is an officers' school in England. I thought it'd be far more interesting to find out all about peace and love.
Well, Alan, we're just about out of time, Alan. We'd like to thank you for coming on the show. Anything else, Mr. X, before we wrap it up?
No, nope. I was just going to ask him if there's anything he wanted to share before we ended the show.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much for your hospitality. Thank you for taking the time to read the book. And I hope two things. You enjoyed it. And most of all, I hope that there were a number of times in the book where you flat out laughed out loud.
Yeah. You know, Alan, I think the best place to wrap it up for today, if you let people know when the book will be available and how they can get it.
June 24, you can get it through Amazon, obviously. Hopefully you can get it in your local bookstore if you still have a bookstore in your town. They're getting thinner on the ground. We used to have a wonderful Barnes and Nobles here in Prescott. Long gone.
Wow. What a great storyteller you are. I do encourage people to go get the book, because I tell you, I read the version that was emailed to me, but it made for a wonderful read. Just great storytelling. Thank you so much, Alan. Take care, my friend.
Well, thank you both very much, gentlemen. Thank you for your hospitality. Thank you for your time.
Anytime.
All right.
All
Thank you.
right.